I keep seeing the same comment under every video about what's happening in America right now, whether it's ICE raids in churches and schools, police shooting people with no accountability, rights being rolled back, or democracy itself under attack. Someone in the comments always says, the French would never let this happen. Sometimes it's half serious, most of the time it's guillotine jokes. But after living in France for the past 6 years and seeing just how their citizens react when the government overreaches, they're right. The French actually wouldn't let this happen. Not because they're more radical and not because they're angrier, but because they understand something fundamental about power that Americans have completely forgotten. When I moved to France in 2019, I thought the constant protests were excessive. I thought, why can't they just be reasonable, go vote, work through the system? Then I watched from France as Americans, my friends, my family, silently accepted things that would literally shut this country down. Mass deportations of neighbors. In France, people would physically block it. Police killing citizens. In France, cities would burn until there was accountability. Government threatening democratic institutions. In France, the president would be politically destroyed. But in America, we tweet, we write think pieces, we're outraged on TikTok, we wait for the next election, and then nothing changes. The problem isn't that Americans don't care. The problem is that we've been trained to forget that we have power and how to use it. So today, I'm breaking down exactly what the French understand about resisting authoritarianism and defending democracy, and why learning this might be the most important thing Americans can do right now. But first, we need to go back to the year 1789. July 14th, 1789. A crowd of ordinary Parisian workers, bakers, blacksmiths, shoekeepers, stormed a government fortress called the Bastille. They didn't ask for permission, they didn't sign a change.org petition, they just took it. And here's the crazy part. France celebrates this day every year as its national holiday. Like, imagine if America's 4th of July was about the time regular people violently overthrew the government. Wait, but America's founding was a revolution too, right? Yeah, it was, but we conveniently forgot that part. We turned it into a barbecue holiday. But the French didn't forget, because they didn't just have one revolution, they kept doing it. In 1830, the French overthrew the king again. In 1848, they overthrew that government. And in 1870, they overthrew power again. Then, in World War II, when the Nazis occupied France, regular people formed the resistance and fought their own government. Now, imagine being a French kid at this time with a grandmother who's in the resistance. At dinner, she's telling you about the time she and her neighbors fought armed soldiers because the government had become illegitimate. What lesson are you learning? You're learning that sometimes, when those in power break the social contract, people have the right, the responsibility, to break some rules too. American kids learned, 1776 happened, a declaration was signed, democracy was achieved, and we all lived happily ever after. French kids learn, your job as a citizen is to constantly check power, even when, and especially when, it's inconvenient. That difference compounds over generations. In 2005, 2 French teenagers, Zayed and Bouna, were killed running from the police. Within hours, French cities are burning, and not just a few neighborhoods. I'm talking across the entire country. For weeks, the government declares a state of emergency. International news calls it chaos. But you know what happened? Actual investigations, police accountability reforms, a national reckoning with police violence. Compare that to America. How many names do you know? How many videos have we seen? George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile. The list goes on and on and on. We had the largest protests in American history in 2020. There were millions of people in the streets. And what changed systematically? Almost nothing. Qualified immunity still exists. And in fact, police budgets actually went up in most cities. The French riot for weeks and get reforms. Americans protest peacefully for months and get nothing. So what's the difference? Now look, before you comment something like, but France has problems too, I know, okay? I know that France isn't perfect. They also have serious issues with racism, with police violence against minorities, economic issues, youth unemployment is terrible, their treatment of Muslim communities has major problems, so I'm not at all saying that France is some utopia that you should worship. I'm just saying that they understand this one specific thing better than Americans. How to collectively resist when government overreaches. That's it. That one thing. And we can learn from that without pretending that France is perfect. The French operate on a completely different assumption about power. French citizens see themselves as a source of government power. The government works for them. If the government forgets that, Citizens remind them, by force if necessary. American citizens see the government as something separate, something above them. You vote, you hope for the best, and you wait for the next election. When the French government tried to deport undocumented immigrants more aggressively in the past few years, do you know what happened? French citizens, people who had nothing to do with immigration personally, physically blocked deportation buses. They surrounded detention centers. They made it impossible to carry out. In America, ICE raids schools and churches. Neighbors watch it happen. We're outraged on TikTok and Twitter. Some people do physically intervene. Alex Pretty did. He stepped in between ICE agents and someone they were trying to detain, and he was shot and killed for it. His death reveals something crucial. Individual acts of courage happen in the US too, but they're isolated, they're unsupported, and they're often fatal. The French have been taught, if their government does something immoral, making it illegal for you to stop them doesn't make it right. It makes resistance necessary. But French resistance doesn't come from nowhere. There's infrastructure, neighborhood assemblies, community networks, political organizations that aren't waiting for election season to make a change. French high school students organize walkouts and protest regularly, not just about school issues, but about national politics, climate issues, humanitarian rights. American students have to ask the principal for permission to hold a protest after school in a designated area. See the difference? And when there's a threat to democracy, different groups coordinate. Unions, student groups, immigrant rights organizations, environmental activists, they all recognize if one right falls, all rights are threatened. The Yellow Vest in 2018 started as a protest against gas tax, but it became about defending democracy itself, about the feeling that the government doesn't listen to its people anymore. You had rural conservatives protesting alongside urban leftists. People who disagreed on almost everything agreed on one thing. The government works for us, not the other way around. And they forced the president to back down. He made multiple concessions. Macron's political capital was permanently damaged. That's what organized, sustained resistance looks like. Not a march on Saturday when everyone goes home at the end feeling good, but weeks of making normal life impossible until power responds. Now, here's the part that's gonna make you angry. Americans didn't just understand this once upon a time, but we were actually good at it. Remember the civil rights movement? They didn't win by asking nicely. They won by making segregation impossible to sustain. Sit-ins that shut down businesses, marches that blocked commerce, boycotts that crushed local companies. They got beat up, they got arrested, and yes, some even got killed. But they made the cost of maintaining segregation higher than the cost of ending it. And they won. The labor movement, they occupied factories, they fought Pinkertons, they had literal battles with private armies hired by corporations. Suffragettes chained themselves to buildings. They went on hunger strikes. They set fires. Every major right Americans have today was won through disruption, not politeness. So what happened? Well, the US government happened. COINTELPRO, the FBI's counterintelligence program that ran from 1956 to 1971, was explicitly designed to disrupt, misdirect, and discredit and otherwise neutralize political movements that the government deemed threatening. They didn't just spy on activists, but they assassinated leaders, planted false evidence, and destroyed organizations from within. Then, they made the effective tactics illegal. Blocking infrastructure, federal crime. Occupying buildings, you're getting criminal trespass and domestic terrorism charges. Effective boycotts, illegal now under various state laws. Masking your identity at protests, that's also illegal now in many states. Protest too effectively, and you'll spend decades in prison. The message here is this: you can protest as long as it doesn't actually threaten power. But the legal crackdown was only the half of it. They also reprogrammed how Americans think about resistance. They turned Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "A riot is a language of the unheard," into a saint of peaceful, convenient protest. They completely erased the fact that he was arrested 29 times, he shut down cities, that he was called a communist and a troublemaker. Now we're taught, be civil, be peaceful, don't disrupt. Work within the system. If you block a highway, they'll say, "You're hurting your cause." Break a window and you'll hear, "This delegitimizes the movement." And God forbid you make anyone uncomfortable. They'll be quick to tell you, "This isn't how you create change." Except being civil hasn't worked. The system just ignores civil protest. Million-person marches that politicians can just wait out. Online petitions that get ignored. Awareness campaigns that raise awareness but don't stop the harm. So now, when something unjust happens, here's the American response. Post about it online. Call your senator. He doesn't care. Vote in the next election. It's 9 months away. We doom scroll, we feel helpless, and the cycle repeats. Meanwhile, when something unjust happens in France, people organize within hours. Streets get blocked within days. The government faces actual consequences within weeks. It's the same injustice, but a completely different response. Now, I do want to be clear about something. People are organizing in America. There are protests happening around the country right now. The media doesn't show this because they don't want you to know. They don't want you getting ideas. They don't want you organizing. So don't think that people aren't doing anything. They are. And I don't know if the US media is showing this, but I see it here in France on the news. But the truth is, most of these protests aren't working, and it's not because people don't care or they're not trying hard enough, but because we've forgotten the tactics that forces power to respond. Let me tell you about one of the most useless protests I've ever seen. 2017, the Women's March. Millions of people in the streets. It's historic, there's pink hats everywhere. Everyone's very polite, they stayed on the sidewalk, didn't block traffic, and they all cleaned up their trash afterwards. The media praised about how civil it was. Politicians tweeted supportive messages. And then, absolutely nothing changed. No policy reversals, no accountability, no consequences. Now, let me tell you about a useful protest. In 2023, the French government raises the retirement age by 2 years. Just 2 years. And the entire country shuts down. Garbage piles up in the streets for weeks. Refineries are blocked. Trains stop running. Nothing moves. President Macron's approval rating craters. His political agenda dies, and his party loses future elections. The law still technically passed, but the political cost was so high that no government will try it again for at least a generation. So what's the difference between these protests? Well, it's this. People in power do a simple calculation. They weigh the cost of giving you what you want versus the cost of ignoring you. As long as ignoring you costs them nothing, they'll ignore you forever. A march that doesn't disrupt anything, the cost of ignoring that is zero. You marched, you felt good, and you went home. They just had to wait you out, and then business continued as usual. But a protest that stops commerce, blocks government function, makes normal life impossible, now there is a cost. Every day you disrupt, they lose money, legitimacy, and control. And when that cost gets high enough, they change their minds real fast. This isn't about who has the moral high ground. Power doesn't care about morality. It's simple math. Power responds to costs, not to appeals to fairness. Now here's something critical that Americans miss. The French don't wait until something becomes a law to start fighting it. This is the American pattern. A bill gets proposed, people complain online, the bill passes, people protest for a weekend, and then everyone accepts it. The French pattern, though, looks like this. A bill gets proposed, there's mass mobilization immediately, and the government either backs down or pays a catastrophic political cost. But the point is, they fight at the proposal stage, before it becomes a law, when it's still stoppable. And if they lose, if the law passes anyway, they don't give up. They keep fighting. They make enforcement impossible. They make the political cost so high that the next government reverses it. Do French protests always work? No. They lose battles. The pension law did end up getting passed, but here's the difference. They made Macron pay for it. His government was crippled. His political capital was destroyed. And now every politician in France knows, try this again and your career is over. So that's a long-term win even when you lose the immediate battle. Polite protest lets power ignore you. Disruption forces power to respond. And the timing matters. Fight it before it becomes a law, not after. One of the main bottlenecks of implementing this is that Americans have been taught, focus on yourself, protect your own family, don't stick your neck out for others. So when ICE comes to your neighbor's door, you close your door and feel bad. When police kill someone in another neighborhood, you retweet something and move on. When rights are stripped from people who don't look like you, you think, at least it's not me. And then they come for you, and there's no one left to help. This isolation is by design because divided people can't resist. When France tried to crack down on undocumented immigrants, French citizens, people who weren't personally affected at all, organized to protect them. And here's what's crazy. These are all people with different political beliefs doing this together. Conservative farmers, progressive city activists, people who disagree on almost everything. But they agreed on this. When the government comes for any of us unjustly, we all resist. We're all vulnerable to state power. Today it's them, tomorrow it's me. Americans are trained to work through proper channels if they want to get things done. file a complaint, contact your representative, start a petition, wait for the legal process. This takes months or even years, and 98% of the time, nothing happens. Here's the principle. When you're asking for justice, saying, please, this isn't fair, we deserve better, they can say no. You have no leverage. In demanding justice, saying, we're stopping this injustice right now by any means necessary, now you have leverage. You're negotiating from power. Those in power respect power, not appeals to morality. Property matters more than people. Order matters more than justice. Disruption creates urgency. And I know this is uncomfortable to hear because we want to believe that appealing to morality works, but history shows us different. Direct action gets the goods. Okay, I need to add something crucial here because I know what some of you guys are thinking. You're thinking, I can't risk getting arrested. I have too much to lose. And that's fine. That's completely valid. So in that case, I implore you to use the one form of power that's perfectly legal and that America is uniquely positioned to use. Stop spending your money. American consumer spending makes up 70% of the US economy. 70%. The entire system is built on you buying things you don't need, constantly, without thinking. Your daily $6 coffee, your fast fashion that you'll wear twice, the Amazon package you don't remember ordering. What happens if all of that were to suddenly stop? The French don't just protest in the streets. They organize economic boycotts and general strikes that actually work. In September 2025, an organized movement called Bloquons tout, block everything, spread across France. The message was simple. On September 10th, we're not paying, we're not consuming, we're not working. It wasn't organized by unions or political parties. It started online. Regular people coordinating through TikTok, Telegram, WhatsApp, and Facebook. And on September 10th, over 175,000 people participated. They blocked highways, blocked gas stations in Bordeaux, Paris, Rennes, Nantes. Schools closed, businesses shut down. The metro was disrupted. The government deployed 80,000 riot police, the largest police mobilization since the Yellow Vest in 2018. Because when French people say they're going to shut down the economy, they actually do it. Compare that to American boycotts. We boycott for a week, maybe two, and then we forget, or it becomes too inconvenient, or we see a sale. How many times have you seen boycott Starbucks trending while the line is wrapped around the building? We can't stay focused long enough to make it hurt. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Economic resistance requires the one thing most Americans are not good at: delayed gratification, sustained focus, collective discipline. A boycott that lasts 3 days is just a weekend. A boycott that lasts 3 months destroys a company's quarterly earnings and forces change. Could you give up your daily coffee run for 3 months if that meant defunding a corporation, supporting policies you hate? Could you stop buying new clothes for 6 months if it meant bringing a company to its knees? Could you delete Amazon and actually stick with it? Because here's the math. It's a minor inconvenience for you, but is a catastrophic impact for them. One person stopping doesn't matter, but 1 million people stopping for a sustained period, that gets board meetings, that gets emergency calls, that gets policy changes. Now here's where I'm gonna say something that's a little more uncomfortable and maybe some might say too radical, but maybe we need to get even more radical than targeted boycotts. Maybe we need to stop all non-essential spending, not just at companies that support ICE or conservative politicians, everywhere. All at once. Because money is the only thing that matters to power. I know that sounds harsh, but think about what's at stake. If the economy grinds to a halt because people stop buying anything they don't absolutely need to survive, the government has to respond immediately. They can ignore protests. They can't ignore economic collapse. That would bring the system to its knees faster than any protest ever could. You already have this power. You're already wielding it. You're just wielding it in their favor. American consumer culture is built on convenience over principles. But the question is, what are you willing to be inconvenienced by to stop funding your own oppression? Here's the most dangerous thing Americans believe. Once you win a right, it's permanent. It's in the law. It's protected by the Constitution. It's settled. Civil Rights Act, 1964. Roe v. Wade, 1973. The Voting Act of 1965. Done. Close the book. We won. Move on. Except Roe was overturned. Voting rights are being gutted. Police immunity has expanded. And Americans are like, wait, how did that happen? I thought those things were settled. The French never make this mistake. They understand Rights aren't something you win once. Rights are things you defend forever. We have watched the French fight the same battles over and over. Abortion rights, they've had to defend them multiple times against conservative governments. Same with police violence. Every time there's a case, there are massive protests around the country until there's accountability. Surveillance laws, every attempt to extend police power faces organized resistance. Labor laws, they're continuously defended against each new government that tries to restrict them. It's exhausting. They're fighting constantly. But you know what they have? The rights still exist, they're still strong, and they're still protected. Meanwhile, American rights erode quietly. Roe was overturned. There was a weekend of protests and then quiet acceptance. Voting rights were restricted and there was barely any sustained response. Police immunity expanded and most people don't even know what happened. Surveillance increased and people said, well, I have nothing to hide. The French assume they will always try to take from us. We must be ready to fight back. Americans assume we won these rights. Surely they're safe. The courts will protect them. Rights are like muscles. If you don't use them, they atrophy. The right to protest only exists if you actually protest. The right to resist only exists if you actually resist. The French protest regularly, so everyone remembers how. The knowledge gets passed down. The infrastructure stays strong. Americans stop protesting, and now we've forgotten how to do it effectively. And I know what you're thinking. This is exhausting. You're saying we have to fight forever? Yes. That's exactly what I'm saying. But here's the thing, you're exhausted anyway. You're exhausted from watching rights disappear. You're exhausted from feeling helpless. You're exhausted from accepting things as they are. You can be exhausted from fighting for dignity or exhausted from accepting indignity. At least one of those things has a chance of changing things. Okay, I can feel some of you freaking out right now. You're thinking, but I'll get arrested, but I have kids, but Americans are too divided, but this is too extreme. And I know some of you are already typing,
you're advocating violence. This is illegal.
So let me be very clear in what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am not advocating for violence against people. I'm not telling you to hurt anyone. What I am talking about is civil disobedience, a long-standing American tradition. Civil disobedience means intentionally breaking unjust laws or obstructing unjust enforcement and accepting the legal consequences. Martin Luther King Jr. did this. He was arrested 29 times. He wrote "Letter from Birmingham Jail" while he was in prison for civil disobedience. The suffragettes did this. They were arrested, force-fed in prison. Some even died for the cause. The freedom riders did this. They knew they'd be arrested and they did it anyway. This isn't a new idea. It's how every major social movement in American history actually won. Yes, blocking ICE raids is illegal. Yes, occupying a building is illegal too. Yes, sustained economic disruption might be illegal under certain circumstances. That's the entire point of civil disobedience. You break unjust laws to expose them as unjust, and you accept the consequences to demonstrate your moral conviction. The difference between civil disobedience and violence is this. Violence targets people. Civil disobedience targets systems, property, and commerce while protecting human life. Now, am I telling you to break the law? I'm simply telling you what historically has worked. What you do with that information is your decision. What I'm not telling you to do is hurt people, and anyone who tries to frame this as me advocating violence is either misunderstanding deliberately or misrepresenting what civil disobedience means. But the objections and the fears that you have are real fears, and they're the same fears that keep people trapped. So let's tackle them. Rejection number 1. I can't get arrested. I have a job, I have kids, I have responsibilities. This fear is real and it's valid, and the system uses this fear to keep you in line. But think about the alternative. If everyone is too scared to resist, then when does it end? When ICE comes for your neighbor? When police kill someone in your community with no consequences? When they come for your rights next? At some point, someone has to be willing to take risks, or nothing ever changes. The system is designed to make resistance the most dangerous for the people who need change the most. And this is exactly why this has to be a collective effort from different people taking different roles. The point isn't that everyone does everything. The point is that everyone does something within the level of risk that they can actually take. Because the alternative, everyone doing nothing because no one can do everything, is exactly how we got here in the first place. The next objection, but Americans are too divided to come together. Okay, this one seems true, I'll admit. Americans can't agree on anything. We're split on politics, race, religion, geography, literally everything. We can't even agree on basic facts anymore. How are we supposed to organize together when we can't stand each other? Well, France is also deeply divided. There are far-right nationalists, communists, Greens, and everything in between. But they unite on one thing. When the government threatens any of our rights, we all resist. You don't have to agree with someone on immigration, abortion, or healthcare to agree that police shouldn't be killing people without any accountability. And you don't have to like each other to recognize that if they come for any of us, they can come for all of us. The primary conflict is, do we have rights, or does the government have unchecked power? Anything else is secondary. Unite on that, and fight about the rest later. The next objection, but this is too radical. It's too extreme. Let me ask you something. What's actually extreme? Is it extreme to want police who don't kill people with immunity? A government that doesn't deport neighbors that have lived here for decades? Rights that don't disappear based on which party wins? Democracy that actually responds to people, not just donors? Or is it extreme that police kill 1,000+ people per year without accountability? That ICE is raiding schools and churches? That a president can threaten to abandon NATO and democratic allies? That 3 people have more wealth than half the country? The civil rights protesters were also called extremists. The suffragettes were called extremists. The labor organizers were called extremists. They were all called too extreme, too radical, too disruptive. So those are your objections, and I get it. They are very real. But every objection is a reason that someone else gave for not fighting. And if everyone accepts those reasons, nothing changes. So here's what this comes down to. The fundamental difference isn't culture. It's not that French people are naturally braver. It's this. French people see themselves as citizens who grant power to government. If government abuses that power, citizens take it back. Americans see themselves as subjects who hope government is benevolent. French people understand democracy isn't a thing you achieve once. It's a thing you do, constantly, forever. Americans think democracy is automatic, that the system will self-correct, that someone else will fix it. Remember, rights are like muscles. Use them or lose them. The French exercise democratic power constantly. The muscle stays strong. Americans stopped. And now we're weak and wondering how it happened. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Remember that power is not given, it's taken. Remember that rights are not permanent, they're practiced. Remember that you are not alone, even when they try to isolate you. Remember to fight before things become law, not after. Remember that losing one battle does not mean giving up the war. And remember that every single right you have, every single one, exists because someone who came before you refused to accept things as they were. The French aren't just fighting for themselves. They're protecting a social contract that says human dignity matters more than order. Americans don't have that contract anymore because we stopped fighting for it. So the question I leave you with is, are you going to start fighting?